Good evening. Hi, everyone. Please take your seat. So I have two people to introduce. First, Professor Heidi Larson, who's a professor of Anthropology, Risk and Decision Science, who brought with her William Schultz in case her voice goes on strike or something like that, because she has a health problem. So Professor Larson is an anthropologist, director of the Vaccine Confidence Project, has worked before with UNICEF, Gavi, many other institutions, but for the sake of saving time, please join me in welcoming Professor Larson and Will Schultz.
Okay, no, it's laryngitis. It's no, my voice is not striking. So, as you saw on the screen, I'm going to talk about risk and rumor in global health, but we're particularly going to focus on the case of vaccines. I'm a professor of anthropology and risk, as you heard, in the IDE and EPH faculty, and I also lead the Vaccine Confidence Research Group, and Will is one of our key researchers there and has worked together with me, particularly on a rumor analysis in Ghana, which he will present and help in case my voice. So I'll start and see how long we go. One thing I like to say about rumors is that they have a bad reputation. Actually, when you really look at the pure definition, they're not negative by nature. In fact, in public health, rumors have been used as listening to rumors has been a very important aspect of disease detection, particularly for outbreaks. If you go to WHO in their archives, they have rumor registries, and they were not to follow fake news. They were absolutely to help with 40 years ago to pick up signals of Ebola, and in other cases, towards the end of smallpox, they were trying to kind of do community listening to pick up rumors of any potential cases of smallpox. So the principle is basically they're just about uncertainty and about not being verified, which actually makes it interesting for us as a community of scientists to actually verify them or not. One of the things that we analyze in our research group is, one, where's the trigger? Where do they start? Who starts them? And how do they spread? And we've seen consistently that the same rumor trigger in different countries and different settings can play out very differently, and it has to do with the cultural, the political, the historical fertile ground that's around. And the other aspect of it is for instance, right now in the world, it's a pretty low trust environment. I would say it's pretty rock bottom trust in a lot of different spheres, and that's a ripe environment for rumors. Humanitarian disasters and situations where people are cut off from communication, like in the tsunami in 96. Not 96, 2006, in places where sometimes with disease outbreaks. So those kind of situations when there's uncertainty, they're a ripe time for people to fill in with the little information they know. Rumors are not unique to public health, but we can see that they're not just rumors. They can have serious impacts. I mean, frankly, rumors drive the stock markets up and down. Speculation. I think Bloomberg News, in their guidelines for their journalists, they are not allowed to use the word rumor. They are instead told to use the word speculation. And that's a lot of what drives. And it's based on pieces of information and based that people are projecting what will happen. But they also have public health impacts. This is in the early 90s, there were rumors about the tetanus vaccine causing sterilization. Now, the trigger of this was actually a scientific article about Depo-Provera, one of the contraceptive vaccines, and in part of the paper it said that they used tetanus toxoid as a protein carrier. One of the human pro-life Catholic networks, which was quite a global network even before social media and the internet, got a hold of this and said, aha, tetanus in a sterilization vaccine. I mean, in a contraceptive vaccine. They say tetanus, but they're trying to stop reproduction. And so that swirled around the world. How they got out to their 60 countries very quickly. I'm not sure how they got it so quickly, but at any rate, it had pretty damaging impacts from South America to Tanzania, Philippines. The mayor of Manila banned the vaccine, and it triggered a drop from 70% coverage to 47%. So these are not just rumors and stories. They are more than that, and the reason we care about them and monitor them and investigate them is that they can have negative impacts. I suppose one of the biggest ones that I've had to work on was in northern Nigeria when Kano State boycotted the polio eradication vaccination from 1993 to 94. Sorry, 2003. Somehow it's my stuffed head. From 2003 to 2004, they boycotted it, and even though they boycotted it locally, and it was due to rumors of sterilization. Sterilization has been quite a theme historically in the literature. You see it a lot in the anthropology literature. Sterilization is one of the fundamental existential phenomenal things about and very prone to be a common rumor theme in societies that feel like somebody is out to count them or somebody is out to, if they're a minority, there's often that anxiety. It's a theme that comes up again and again in some of the vaccine anxieties. This particular rumor, as it persisted, not only had local impacts but reinfected over 20 countries and cost the global polio eradication program about $500 million. And it was really this experience that prompted me to leave the UN and set up our research group, because this was more than, we were doing a lot of crisis management and not enough real investigation to understand what's driving these things. WHO became very concerned. As you can see, the cases went from up to 1,100, you can read, compared to we had finally gotten it down under 1,000, and then it started to go up. And this is just a small increment, but it went quite much higher. The rumors were a mix. They were basically, in terms of fertile ground, a northern candidate for the presidency from the northern, mostly Muslim-dominated north, lost to the Christian-dominated, more wealthy south. And part of what was going on is that the north did not want to cooperate on a national campaign and was not interested in making the president look good. And so this was one of the drivers. There were multiple drivers. There was also the background of a drug trial, a meningitis drug trial, in which a child had died, and they were suspecting that it was related to the clinical trial. And even though it wasn't, it created anxiety, and it was another aspect of fertile ground. Nigeria was not the only one that had rumors that have had to be managed. Kenya also had rumors, and some of them were common across a number of different countries. Why do you keep coming with your polio vaccine? You're not dealing with all the other things that we think are important. And there were just a number of, some of them quite locally relevant, and some of them became themes across countries. Ebola was a huge fertile ground for rumors. Why was it in West Africa? It's not real. Somebody's imposing it. This only happens in sub-Saharan Africa, in the bush. And people were afraid. They didn't have information. Our group is leading on a major vaccine trial, Ebola vaccine trial in Sierra Leone. And that was, I mean, one of the anxieties, and will tell you more about one of the stage 1, phase 1 trials in Ghana too, that were shut down because of rumors, feared that the vaccine was going to be giving them Ebola rather than preventing it. The other thing is that rumors you think they go away, but they are a bit like a cancer. They kind of hang out and they come up when the time is right. I had mentioned earlier the tetanus sterilization rumors from the early 90s. A couple years ago, they came up again, same rumors in Kenya. The Catholic Bishops Association, there was a national tetanus vaccination campaign in Kenya, and the bishops were not invited to participate, and usually the religious leaders are involved with national campaigns just to be part of the community mobilization process. And this time they weren't included, and they weren't real happy about that, and it made them pretty suspicious. So it was this trigger of being excluded that they obviously went online, or somebody did in their group, and discovered these old rumors and sterilization and documents. So the whole thing came back 20 years later. And this was around the tetanus vaccine, but then the next year, they insisted on the same problems in a polio campaign in Kenya. So these are things that once they're on the radar screen, particularly now with the internet and social media, we've created a diagnostic tool of certain things that come up, certain fertile grounds for these things, and the potential impacts they can have. As I mentioned, sterilization is a recurring theme. There's a really fascinating a review of the literature, and it looks at a number of different country experiences. Rumours, there's one of my favorite books is called The Social Amplification of Risk. It is actually the whole area of amplification of risk and risk science and decision-making as a science. It really got going around the environmental risks and nuclear energy and people's anxieties about these new technologies coming in. And there's been a lot of research on that we draw a lot on how that happened. Rumors vary by locality and population. What drives them in one neighborhood, you can go a district away in the same country, and they can be different. For instance, in this area, this Katsina is a state, the biggest reason for vaccine rejection was fear of side effect. In a neighboring Kaduna state, 52% was related to religious beliefs. So you really need to, it's just stresses the importance of really not making assumptions. You need to do research, you need to understand what's going on. Increasingly, particularly with big data, social media, and other technologies, there's a lot more science around it, and if there's one thing that our mantra is in the Vaccine Confidence Project, is bringing a systematic approach to measuring, monitoring, and investigating rumors as they pertain to public health impacts and how to respond. This is one I'm going to hand over to Will, because Ghana was the place where we had 2 vaccine trials that were shut down because of popular rumors. He'll explain a bit of our analysis of it, and then we'll show you a short film that he led in Ghana, interviewing a number of the participants, so you can see on the different sides how these things can happen. Because a lot of times when you do your educational training, you get the good things that we need to push out there and then land up there, and then you realize, well, what happens when people don't want the good things you're going to bring them? Over to Will.
Hi. So, as Heidi said, I'm a researcher in the Vaccine Confidence Project with her. Cool, they've improved these tables. It used to be if you leant on them, they would collapse. Anyway, so, as many of you may be aware, the recent Ebola outbreak in West Africa occasioned quite a deal of research into candidate Ebola vaccines, initially with the hope of stopping the outbreak, although it stopped quickly enough that pretty soon the motivation transitioned to preparing for the next outbreak by testing a number of candidate vaccines that were known to be possibly effective, but their level of effectiveness wasn't known, and their safety aspects also weren't known. So the school was very much involved in these vaccine trials, or at least some of them, and our team was involved with the school's efforts as well, particularly on the issue of potential rumors disrupting the trial, which was what I was working on. And I was part of a team that was specifically trawling the web, trying to identify any articles in the Ghanaian media, online media that is, of which there's a fair amount these days, that might have implications for the trial, and to conduct as much research as possible if such a rumor arose. And as it turned out, it did in Ghana, which wasn't what we were expecting, partly because Ghana was not directly infected. But as it turned out, that itself can make people sensitive because you ask questions like, well, if the disease isn't here, what responsibility do we have to suffer whatever risks might be associated with the trial? Unfortunately, that's a very sober and relatively relaxed version of what people were saying at the time in Ghana. And we'll get into a lot more detail, particularly in the video, of what people's concerns were and who the various influential people were who inflamed those concerns. But for the moment, I want to talk about the analytical approach we took in the paper that was surprisingly recently published, given that we collected the data several years ago, but such things take time. So yes, I'm going to focus a little bit on the analytics, and then we're going to show the video. So if you're feeling a little left behind by the content, rest assured that details are coming. This is part of a graph that was too tall to show full screen, but the bottom is here. As you can see, it graphs over about 2 months the number of mentions in the totality of news articles published on Ghanaian news websites that mention each given organization that was involved in it. This was actually quite easy to do. We had the corpus of text from each article, and we just did a keyword search for capitalized words and excluded people's actual names, and arrived at a pretty clear ranking of the organizations that were referenced in these articles. In general, they're organizations that were either being blamed for the trials, which had become very controversial, obviously, and people who were doing the blaming. So the top organizations here are the Ghanaian FDA, MOH, the World Health Organization. A little more interestingly, the National Democratic Congress, the NDC, which is a political party, is one of the first organizations to really promote these rumors, was this political outfit that, as you'll see in the video, was actually concerned that if the trials which were to take place in their area had any negative consequences, that they could be blamed for it. And actually, they were afraid that if people died in the trials, they would be losing people who would have voted for their party, which amazingly is something that the guy actually was willing to say on camera. But people have their practical concerns, and when vaccines in the context of a trial or an actual vaccination campaign get mixed up in those concerns, they can very vigorously oppose it, as we'll see. This is the rest of that same graph. The Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Coalition for Ghana Independence Now were two of the blamer organizations that were particularly responsible for whipping up fears, again, as we'll see in the video shortly. This is a plot over time. Red is criticisms of the trial, and green is rebuttals or debunkings of those criticisms, you might say. This isn't terribly informative. The main graph for showing the content of those concerns is here, but I don't really expect that to be visible. But I do want to give a sense of how we collected the data and what a content analysis data set looks like after you've collected it. So each row here is a theme. A red row is a critique, a green row is a rebuttal or a debunking of the critique, and each little square or absence of a square represents a day. And the darkness of the color represents how many times that theme was referenced in all the media collected on that day. So the top half of this graph represents, you can see it's a bit separated out into 4 chunks, with the largest chunk at the bottom being the things that we couldn't think how to categorize. But the top 3 chunks are related to the topic of people saying that the trial was a secret, that it was being smuggled into the country for some nefarious purposes, or a little bit more moderately, people complained that the relevant stakeholders hadn't been given adequate information about the trial. The next chunk, safety and side effects, and particularly people were afraid that in order to test a vaccine against Ebola, you would have to expose people who were vaccinated to Ebola, which obviously people who know research ethics know isn't going to happen. But if you don't know that, it is sort of a sensible thing to be afraid of. In addition to that, people were afraid, as people often are with vaccines, that the vaccine itself, because it contains components that are supposed to sensitize your immune system to the disease, might have something that could give you Ebola or revert back to Ebola or some other disease. And then finally, the skinny row in the middle there is another concern that people had been given incentives that actually people complained that the incentive package was too much and was therefore coercive, and also that it was too little and therefore not enough compensation for your travel and your trouble and undertaking the risks of the trial, which obviously people thought were much greater than they actually were. And just to highlight one way in which collecting data like this can be useful, is you can see that particularly in the incentives row, the critiques are much, much more numerous. You see the red is much, much darker and occurring on more days than the debunking, which only appeared on 4 days and wasn't very dark on any of those days. So if I were taking this back, this analysis back to the communications team, I would say, whatever strategy you had for dealing with the incentives concerns doesn't seem to have succeeded in getting much media attention to your debunking of that concern. So that's as much as I want to go into this rather complicated graph. Now I'd like to show you the video, if it will play.
The body count is rising in West Africa. The scourge from Ebola shows no signs of stopping.
The fear and mistrust took a violent turn in Liberia's capital, Monrovia. An angry crowd, many of them armed with clubs, raided an Ebola isolation ward in the city's largest slum.
It's a process that usually takes years, but in the race to beat the Ebola epidemic, doctors and scientists are speeding up efforts to create a vaccine against the virus in a matter of months.
The African countries cried out to the global community to come to the aid of Africa in fighting Ebola.
However, we'd never had a trial as sensitive a virus as the Ebola virus.
Because mind you, we're coming from a backdrop where Ebola had killed, between Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, had killed almost 11,000 people within that short space of time. So there was so much fear in the system.
It was meant to kill people. That was the news going around.
What were you going to use as the vaccine? Is it an Ebola vaccine or is it another vaccine? What is it? What is the component of the vaccine you're going to use?
People felt like this thing was being done undercover.
Why Ghana? Wouldn't it involve bringing the virus to Ghana before you start? Did you know the difference between the virus and the vaccine? Do we have the systems? Do we even know how to register trials? Have people been paid a bribe to undertake these trials? Are these scientists taking us for a ride? Where is our regulator? All these questions were asked.
So the whole society was up in arms.
It wasn't a case of the laboratories or the ability to go about the test. It had to do with the issue of fear.
the media broke it as, guess what we've discovered? Here is this news about some clandestine vaccine trial in the Volta region.
Once the FDA began dealing with the protocols and the checks and balances, and having to speak to the center in Hohoi that was going to deal with it, it leaked, or it came out. It didn't leak, it came out. Once it was Ebola, it became an issue.
I had a call from an unknown person from the US. Then they said there's going to be an Ebola vaccine trial in the Volta region of Ghana. There's a midwifery school there, and then some students have been selected for the trial.
No, we had not given approval yet. We had given conditional approval for preparation to start, and the preparation did not include the recruitment of subjects.
And the main fear was one person gets it, or there is a failure. Then it is something that will spread. That is the feeling among the people.
TGIN needs to be highlighted in this trial. They were the first to issue a statement.
I'm a victim of vaccine injury. I wanted the government to listen. I saw from Star FM Online, a local radio station, reporting that a midwifery school in the Volta region is about to go through this exercise. I realized that if we go a bit diplomatic, nobody will listen. Ebola is no more just a disease, but a business. When I did the write-up, a strong group in the Volta region came out with a press release that they can't sit for the people to be used as guinea pigs. Actually, they just copy-paste some of the things that I wrote.
The political outfit of the ruling government, that's the NDC.
Yeah. In the Volta region.
In the Volta region. They issued a statement condemning it.
When we heard about the incentives, we heard about the trials, like I said again, we also had a lot of information from our brothers and sisters who come from the region and stays elsewhere in the diaspora. So we made a press release. People were not educated enough. Leadership for us in the region were not consulted properly. If they were dying, we might have lost people who were going to vote for us anyway, in the first place. And that was our agenda. Within 10 minutes, it was out there. We went to the social media, we went to radio, we went to print media. There was spontaneous response from Ghanaians.
A lot of people are confused. The youth are agitating and massing up for demonstration. Mr. Speaker, at this time of our country's development, we will not want to see social unrest due to negligence in educating the public.
About the 9th or 10th of June, there was a discussion on our national parliament that there were going to be trials in Ghana.
There was an initial allegation that the trial had already started in the Volta region without information to anybody. First, that was debunked. There were issues of bribery.
It is said that persons who volunteer for the exercise will be given 200 cedis and a mobile phone.
Mr. Speaker, MPs from the region have been inundated with phone calls from panic-stricken constituents who believe that this trial is aimed at spreading the dreaded Ebola disease in the Volta region. Systems that have been put in place to enable such research to be conducted in this country are not good enough.
Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences are on our side. They have also raised concerns. Indeed, they met the minister on June 10th and raised 9 issues of concern.
The Academy is not interested in making unnecessary waves. We saw a situation quietly, we resolve it, send a documentation to where it's needed to change or improve policy. That was what we thought we were doing.
GHLS, their concerns were the seed. They had petitioned the minister, they had petitioned some other members of government.
Concerns were not addressed about the safety issues and surrogate markers of immunity, of efficacy to whatever vaccine that you are going to develop.
The anger of the members of parliament, the anger with the people from the Volta region was as a result of the fact that they felt they had a basis. And the basis was that it was scientists who were challenging the FDA.
The Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences has the best scientists in our country. They are the people that have risen to the pinnacle of their profession. And if they are on the same side as Parliament, then Mr. Speaker, we are in good company.
At the time Parliament had its discussion on the 9th of June, a provisional approval had been given for one of the trials to start in the Volta region. On the floor of Parliament, there was a fiat that no trial of any Ebola vaccine can take place in Ghana.
We shouldn't suspend it. It should be stopped. Not in Ghana here. It should be done somewhere else. If they want to do it in Ghana, they should do it in the laboratories with mice, rats, and chimpanzees, but not with human beings. We would urge the Minister for Health and all those responsible for admitting or permitting this trial to take place here to reconsider, not just to suspend it, but to say no, thank you.
The ministry has decided that the best thing to do is to suspend the trial. Tony Goodman admitted that the ministry failed to take the public through the necessary education which would have eased their fears about the process.
To bring calm immediately to the situation, there was the immediate suspension of any further activity on it. Unfortunately, there were strict timelines that we had to meet, or that the company that was dealing with it had to meet. And by the time all that had been done through Parliament and through the checks and balances, the timelines had expired.